Good morning. My name is Mother Barbara, and I am so happy to be with you again. Feels like a very long time, but please know you're always in my heart and always in my prayers, even during these long times when we can't be together. But I would like to read you today this book, The Boy and the Ocean. It's a beautiful book, and it talks to us about how God's love is everywhere, so that we can understand God's love is in all the tiny details of our day or our bodies or our lives. And God is also in the great expanse of the oceans and the mountains and the stars at night. And so let's read this together. The Boy and the Ocean by Max Lucado. The little boy rolled over in his bed and he opened his eyes. Through his window, he could see the ocean. What a gift that is, to wake up and see the beautiful waves and hear the ocean just outside your bedroom window. The little boy saw that it was big, big and blue, rolling waves, water crashing on the beach. The little boy stood at the window and searched for the end of the ocean. He couldn't see it. He could see the ships that were on it. He could see the birds that flew above it. He could see the horizon that stretched on forever. But the little boy could not see the end of it. He couldn't see the end of the ocean. Would you like to play in the ocean? His mother asked. The little boy stood on the edge of the water with his mother. She took his hand and they waded out into the surf. When the water covered his feet, he looked up at her. And when it reached his knees, he took his breath and squeezed her hand. And when the waves rushed against his chest, she laughed. So did he. The two sat in the sand and let the waves splash around them. God's love is like the ocean, my little boy, she said. It's always here. It's always deep. It never ends. God's love is special. The little boy spent the whole day playing near the ocean. He counted starfish and built sandcastles, and he searched for shells, but most of all, he watched the ocean. He could see the clouds above it. He could feel the tide within it. He could taste the salt inside it, but he could never see the end of it. He could never see the end of the ocean. That night, as the moonlight stretched across the sea and landed on his face, he listened to the waves slap, slap, slap against the sand. Go to sleep, my little boy, his mother whispered. The ocean will not leave. The ocean will not change. The ocean is like God's love, always there, always deep. It never ends, just like God's love. For God's love is special. Now you might hear my new little kitty saying hello to you. I think she'd like to meet you. So if you hear a little meow, that's Grace reading along. And so the little boy slept with the sound of the ocean in his ears. The next day, the little boy looked out a different window, and he saw the mountains, high and tall, white-tipped, touching the clouds. The little boy looked from side to see the end of the mountains. He could see the trees growing among them. He could see the snow glistening on the top of them, and he could see the birds flying around them, but he couldn't see the end of the mountains. Would you like to hike the mountains? His father said. He took the boy's hand, and together they started up the mountain trail. When the leaves scattered over the boy's feet, he looked up at his father. When the wind shook the tall trees, he took a breath and squeezed his father's hand. When they looked out over the great valley, his father smiled. The boy did too. The two sat on a rock and looked around them. God's love is like the mountains, my little boy, the father said. It's always here. It's always big. It never ends. God's love is special. The two spent the day playing in the mountains. The boy splashed in the creek. He picked flowers in the meadow. He listened to the singing birds, but most of all, he looked at the mountains. He could see the sky above them. He could feel the wind blow through them. He could hear the water that bubbled between them, but he could never see the end of them. He could never see the end of the mountains. Look at that little boy and his little puppy really enjoying close up these big, beautiful mountains. That night, as the moon appeared from behind the peaks, the boy thought of the mountains and smiled. Go to sleep, my little boy, the father whispered. The mountains will not leave. The mountains will not change. The mountains are like God's love. Always here, always tall. It never ends. God's love is special. And so the boy slept with thoughts of mountains in his dreams. The next day he ran on the beach and swam in the water. He chased his puppy up the mountain trail and looked for flowers. And when the day ended, he and his parents lay on the grass and looked up into the night sky. Stars everywhere, twinkling, shimmering diamonds in the dark. He looked as far as he could see to see the end of the sky. He couldn't see it. He could see the moon, yellow and round. He could see the clouds, puffy and fat. And he could see the stars race from one end of the sky to the other. Would you like to count the stars? His mother and father asked. So they tried. 12 here, 2 over there. There were just too many. When he reached 100, the boy looked up at his mother. When the wind turned chilly, his father held him close. His parents looked up into the big sky and became quiet. So did he for a while. But then the boy spoke. God's love is like the night sky, he told them. It's always here. It's always big. It never ends. God's love is special. The boy, the mother, and the father stayed for a long, long time near the ocean, close to the mountains, beneath the sky, surrounded by God's love, and they smiled. May you know that you are surrounded by God's love, which is always here, and always special. May you know this now and always. Amen.